The ballroom shone with too much light. Wax dripped from the tall white candles in the chandeliers, and the smell of melted beeswax mixed with the sharper smell of perfume and warm bodies pressed close. Silk dresses brushed against silk dresses. Shoes tapped on the polished floor in time with the small string band in the corner. Laughter rose and fell like waves on a far shore. In the middle of all this stood a young woman in a pale grey dress and a cloak that did not match the room. The cloak was deep blue, soft once, faded now at the edges where the wool had thinned. Along the hem and across one shoulder ran small neat stitches in a slightly darker thread. Anyone close enough would see them. No one was close enough. No one had been close to her all night. Her name was Maren Holloway, and she was 23 years old, and her mother had been dead for 5 years. She kept the cloak on because she was cold. That was the reason, she told herself. The truth was that taking it off meant handing it to a footman, and handing it to a footman meant standing alone in only her thin grey dress, and standing alone in only her thin grey dress meant being seen. The cloak was a wall. The cloak was a hand on her shoulder. The cloak smelled, faintly, after all these years, of lavender and the small cedar chest her mother had kept by the window. She breathed in slowly through her nose, and the smell came up, the way it always did when she was afraid. Her aunt had brought her to this ball. Her aunt stood across the room now, fan-flicking, talking with 2 other women in tall feathers. Her aunt had not looked her way once. That was the bargain. Maren would come. Maren would stand in the corner. Maren would not speak unless spoken to. In return, Maren would have a roof over her head for 1 more season, and bread on her plate, and a small narrow bed in a small narrow room at the top of the house. She knew the bargain. She kept the bargain. She did not complain. A footman passed with a tray of small glasses, the pale wine inside catching the candlelight. He did not stop. She had not expected him to. The smell of the wine drifted past her, sweet and sharp at the same time, and her throat felt dry, and she swallowed. To pass the time she had a small private habit. She counted the panes in the tall windows that lined the far wall. There were 8 panes in each window, and there were 6 windows, which made 48 panes. She had counted them 3 times already that evening. Each time she counted, she pressed her thumb gently against the inside of her index finger, 1 press for each pane. And the rhythm of it slowed her heart. She was on her 4th count when the room changed. It did not change loudly. It changed the way a room changes when a draft moves through it. A small shift. A turning. The 2 women in feathers near her aunt stopped speaking mid-sentence. A footman near the door stood a little straighter. The string band did not stop, but the leader glanced up, and his bow paused for half a beat before it found the next note. Maren did not know yet what she was feeling. She only knew that her count was lost. She lifted her eyes from the window. A man had come in. He stood just inside the wide doorway at the top of the room, a step ahead of 2 older gentlemen who hung back as if waiting to be called. He was tall, but not the tallest in the room. He was dressed in dark blue and black, his cravat tied simply, no rings, no flash. His hair was the color of wet oak. His face was not what people meant when they used the word handsome. His face was the face of a man who could not be moved by wind. He took up space without trying. That was the thing she saw first. He stood still, and the room arranged itself around him. Her aunt's head turned. Her aunt's fan dropped, very slightly, and then snapped open again. Her aunt's mouth made a small round shape that she covered quickly with a smile. From halfway across the ballroom, Maren could read the word her aunt mouthed. Hartwell, the Duke of Hartwell. Maren had heard the name. Everyone in the county had heard the name. He owned half the land between the river and the hills. He had been in London for the spring. He was not expected here tonight. He was, in fact, the reason for the ball, though the host had given up hope of him coming. And here he was, after all, in the doorway, looking at a room of women who had been arranged for him like flowers in a shop window. He did not look at any of them. He took one slow step in. The two older gentlemen behind him moved at last. A young woman with very gold hair and a very pink dress stepped forward, smiling, her gloved hand half lifted, ready to be introduced. The Duke's eyes touched her face and moved on. A second young woman, dark-eyed and clever-looking, was pushed gently forward by her mother. The Duke nodded politely, said a single word Maren could not hear, and walked past her. He walked past all of them. Maren saw, with a strange small calm, that he was walking toward her side of the room. She thought, he is going to the windows. He wants the air. She lowered her eyes again and pressed her thumb against her finger. 1 pane. 2 panes. 3. She was breathing carefully. He would pass behind her, and she would not turn, and the Count would carry her through. 4, 5, 6. A pair of polished black boots stopped on the polished floor in front of her. The boots were quiet. They had not made the click that other boots made. He had crossed half the room without seeming to hurry, and now he stood there, close enough that she could smell him. He smelled of rain. He smelled of rain, and wood smoke, and something underneath that she could not name, something clean and slightly bitter, like the cold inside a stone church. She raised her eyes. He was looking at her cloak, not at her face, at her cloak, at the small dark stitches along the hem. His gaze travelled up the cloak slowly, finding each mended place, the patch under the arm, the line across the shoulder where her mother had once caught the wool on a nail, and Maren herself, 11 years old, had sat by candlelight with her mother and learned to sew the tear shut. The Duke's eyes counted each of those stitches the way she counted window panes. Then he looked at her face. His eyes were grey. Not the grey of clouds, the grey of slate after rain. "Miss Holloway," he said. He said it as if he had known her name for a long time. The room behind him went strange. She could feel the heads turning. She could feel her aunt's stare from across the floor like a hand pressing on her back. She did not look. She kept her eyes on him, because to look anywhere else would be to admit she was frightened, and she was not going to admit that. "Your Grace," she said. Her voice came out steady. That surprised her. He waited. He did not speak again at once. He gave her the silence the way someone gives another person a chair. She took it. She lifted her chin a small amount. She did not smile. She did not curtsy more than was needed. She had nothing to offer him that he did not already have, and so she offered him nothing extra. "You are not dancing," he said. "No, Your Grace." "Has no one asked?" "Two have asked, Your Grace." I refused. She watched his mouth. The corner of it did not move, but something moved behind his eyes. A small flicker, interest perhaps, or surprise. She could not tell. "May I ask why?" "You may ask, Your Grace." She paused. The pause was a small and dangerous thing. She let it sit. "I do not care to be looked at while I dance." There, it was said. She had not meant to say it that plainly. Now it was said, and she could not take it back, and she did not want to. The Duke's grey eyes held her. The ballroom hummed and rustled around them. Somewhere behind him her aunt was perhaps fainting. Perhaps not. Maren did not look. "I see," the Duke said. He did not laugh. He did not bow and move on. He stood there a moment longer, and she felt his attention on her like a weight. Not unpleasant. Not cruel, but very heavy, the way a quilt is heavy on a cold night. "Then I will not ask you to dance," he said. "Good evening, Miss Holloway." He inclined his head. He turned. He walked, in the same unhurried way, across the floor and out of the ballroom by a different door than the one he had come in by. The two older gentlemen, who had been waiting in the doorway, hurried after him, looking confused. The room let out a long breath together. Conversation rose again. But it was a different sound now. Sharper, hungrier, heads turned toward Maren. Fans lifted to cover mouths. The smell of beeswax was suddenly very strong. She could feel the back of her neck growing hot under the wool of her cloak. She walked, slowly and carefully, to a chair against the wall. She sat. She placed her hands in her lap. She began to count the panes again. She did not see her aunt cross the room. She heard her. The sharp tap of slippers on wood. The hiss of silk. A glove came down hard on her shoulder. Outside, her aunt said. Now, Maren rose. In the corridor, away from the candles, the air was cooler. A long mirror in a gilt frame showed her own face, pale and tight. Her mother's cloak around her shoulders like a small dark bird that had landed and refused to fly. Her aunt's face in the mirror beside hers was red as a winter apple. "What did you say to him?" Her aunt hissed. "He asked me why I was not dancing. I told him." "You told him what?" "That I did not wish to be looked at." Her aunt's mouth opened and closed. The feathers in her hair trembled. Then she leaned in close, so close that Maren could smell the sweet wine on her breath and the powder on her face, and she said, very softly, the words she had been saving for years. "Your mother died in a borrowed bed, wearing a mended cloak. And you will die the same way, you ungrateful little fool, because that is all you are good for, and the Duke of Hartwell has eyes. And he was laughing at you, and you are too stupid to know it." The words landed where they were meant to land. Maren felt them slip in under her ribs. The corridor seemed to grow longer. The mirror seemed to grow farther away. Her hands, inside her thin gloves, went cold. She did not cry. She looked at her aunt's reflection in the mirror, and she looked at her own, and she lifted her hand. Very slowly, and adjusted the collar of her mother's cloak so that the largest mend, the one across the shoulder, lay neatly against her throat. She straightened her back. She turned her face from the mirror to her aunt. "Thank you, Aunt," she said quietly. "I will remember that." Her aunt blinked. Maren walked past her, down the corridor, back into the ballroom. Across the floor where the dancers had begun a new set, and out the far door and down the steps, and into the cold dark of the gravel drive. She did not look back. She did not run. She walked the way her mother had taught her to walk, with her feet placed one in front of the other, with her shoulders square, with her head neither high nor low. The carriages were waiting. Her aunt's was the third in the line. The driver was asleep on the box. She did not wake him. She walked past the carriages and onto the lane. The lane went down between two stone walls, with hedges thick on either side, and beyond the hedges the smell of cold earth and crushed leaves rose up to meet her. The night was not raining, but the air felt full of water, the way it does before rain. Her breath came out in small white clouds. The stone of the lane bit through the thin soles of her dancing shoes. She walked. She did not know where she was walking to. The village was 2 miles away, and the cottage where her old nurse lived was farther still, and she had no money for a hired horse. She walked because she could not stand still. She walked because if she stood still she would feel the words her aunt had said about her mother, and she did not want to feel them yet. She wanted to be somewhere else first. The cloak warmed her shoulders. The mends pressed against her skin. She thought, quite suddenly, of her mother's hands. Long fingers. A small white scar across the back of the left one from a kitchen knife in some other life, long before Maren was born. Her mother's hands had stitched this cloak by candlelight in a small bedroom in a small house, years and years ago, after they had lost the larger house and the carriage and the servants and the name. Her mother had said, while she sewed, that a mended thing was better than a new thing, because a mended thing had been chosen twice. Maren had not understood that, at 11. She understood it now. She kept walking. Behind her, far away, the lights of the great house burned in the dark. She did not turn to look. Inside the great house, at that same moment, the Duke of Hartwell stood in the host's small library, his back to a low fire. His hands folded behind him. The host, a fat, anxious man named Lord Pell, was talking to him in a quick, low voice about a horse. The Duke was not listening. He was watching, through the half-open library door, the corridor where a young woman in a mended cloak had walked past with her aunt some time earlier. He had seen them go in. He had seen only one come out. He had been watching the door for several minutes. He had not meant to come to this ball. He had business in London and more business in the north, and he had told his secretary plainly that he would not appear at any country gathering this season. Then his carriage had broken a wheel 2 villages from here, and a kind tenant had given him a horse. And the road to the next inn had passed by the gates of Lord Pell's estate, and Lord Pell had been at the gates as if by accident, and the Duke, against his better sense, had allowed himself to be brought inside for 1 hour, and an hour was now an hour and a half, and he was still here. He was still here because of the cloak. He had noticed it the moment he stepped into the ballroom. He had not meant to notice anything. He was used to looking at rooms and not seeing them, but the cloak had pulled his eye the way a single dark stone pulls the eye on a beach of pale ones. It was the wrong color for the room. It was the wrong age for the room. And the mends. The mends had stopped him. He knew mending. His own mother had mended. Before she became a duchess, before she was a lady at all, she had been a vicar's daughter in a country parish, and she had taught her sons that a thing well kept was a thing worth keeping. He had watched her, as a boy of 6 or 7, sit by the window in the long afternoons and pull a thin needle through worn linen. Her stitches had been small and neat, like ants in a line. The stitches on the young woman's cloak had been the same. He had crossed the ballroom without thinking. He had spoken her name without thinking. He had heard it earlier in the evening, in the host's nervous list of guests, and his memory had kept it. Holloway, the girl in the grey dress, the one whose father lost everything in the South Sea, and died of it. The aunt who took her in for the price of a quiet servant. He had asked her why she was not dancing. She had told him she did not care to be looked at. He had walked away because to stand there 1 moment longer would have been to make her a spectacle, and he had no right to do that. And he was not the kind of man who needed to. But now she had left. He had seen her leave. He had seen the aunt come back into the ballroom red and breathing hard. He had seen the aunt go to a corner and snap her fan and accept a glass of wine and tell a story to 2 other women, and he had seen the 2 other women laugh in the small, careful way that women laugh when they are not laughing because something is funny. Lord Pell had asked him a question. "Pell," the Duke said. His voice was quiet. "Which way does the lane behind your stable run?" Lord Pell blinked. "Your Grace?" "The lane. Behind the stable." "Which way?" "Why west, Your Grace, down to the village." "But surely, my coat." A footman, who had been standing very still in a corner, sprang to life and was gone before Lord Pell could speak again. The Duke walked to the library door. He did not run. He did not need to. He had already wasted enough time. In the corridor, the long mirror in the gilt frame showed him his own face as he passed. He saw the face he was used to, hard, closed, controlled, the face that other men were afraid of. He did not stop to look. He had not been afraid of his own face in many years. He was not afraid of it now. He found his coat. He found his hat. He did not call for his horse. The horse was at the inn, and the inn was the wrong way. He walked, instead, down the front steps and around the side of the house, past the line of waiting carriages with their sleepy drivers, and onto the lane that went down between 2 stone walls. The air smelled of cold earth and crushed leaves. His breath came out in small clouds. He walked. Maren had reached the bottom of the lane. Here it joined a wider road, and the wider road ran in 2 directions, left to the village and right into the open country where there was nothing for 3 miles but fields and 1 small bridge. She stood for a moment at the join, her dancing shoes already soaked through, her toes numb, and she considered. If she went left, she would reach the village in less than an hour. There were people there who knew her. The vicar's wife would take her in. There would be questions in the morning. There would be a letter to her aunt. There would be the slow climb back into the bargain. And the bargain would tighten, and the small narrow room at the top of the house would feel smaller. If she went right, there was nothing. The fields, the bridge, the wind. She thought about it for a long time. Then she went right. She did not know why. Perhaps because the bargain felt, in that moment, more cold than the cold air. Perhaps because her mother, who had been a brave woman in a hard life, had once said to her, when she was very small, that there were some nights when you had to walk a long way to be able to come back to yourself. Perhaps because she had not yet cried, and she did not want to cry where anyone could see, and the fields were dark and empty, and offered nothing but their own quiet company. She walked. Her shoes squelched. Her cloak grew heavy with the wet of the night air. The stitches her mother had made pressed against her skin and were warm. She reached the bridge after a long time. She did not know how long. The bridge was small and old, stone, with low walls on either side. Below it a stream ran quick and dark. The sound of the water was loud here, the only sound in the world. She stopped in the middle of the bridge. She put one hand on the cold stone wall. She let herself feel, at last, what her aunt had said. Your mother died in a borrowed bed wearing a mended cloak, and you will die the same way. She pressed her hand harder against the stone. The cold of it bit through her glove. She did not cry. She breathed in, and the air smelled of wet grass and old stone, and she breathed out, and she said into the dark, very softly, so softly that even the stream could not hear her, I will not. It was not a grand thing to say. It was 3 small words, but they were hers, and they were said out loud, and she felt them settle inside her like coins dropped in a clay jar. She heard the footstep behind her then. She did not turn at once. She thought, quite calmly, that if it was a robber she would be calm and give him the cloak's small silver pin and walk on. If it was a man with worse than robbery in his head, she would put her back to the wall and use her teeth. She was, she discovered, not afraid. She had used up her fear hours ago in the corridor with her aunt. The footsteps stopped some distance away. A voice she had heard once before said, Miss Holloway. She turned. The Duke of Hartwell stood at the end of the bridge. His dark coat was buttoned high. His hat was in his hand. His hair, which had been smooth in the ballroom, was a little wild now from the walk, falling across his forehead. His breath came out in small clouds, like hers. She stared at him. Your Grace, she said at last. What are you doing here? Walking, he said, in the middle of the night, on the road to nowhere. Yes, she waited. She thought he might say more. He did not. The water ran below the bridge. Somewhere far away a fox barked once, and then was quiet. The cold pressed in around them. You should go back, Your Grace, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. I am not lost. I am not in danger. I am only walking. You owe me nothing, and I am not your concern. I know. Then why are you here? He was quiet for a long moment. He looked at her, and he looked at the bridge, and he looked at her cloak, and then he looked at her face again. When he spoke, his voice was lower than it had been in the ballroom, and there was something in it that she had not heard in any voice for a long time, which was the sound of a man choosing his words carefully, because they mattered. Your aunt said something to you, he said, in the corridor. I could not hear it, but I saw your face when you came back into the ballroom, and I saw your face when you walked out of it, and I have been a man who has watched many faces, Miss Holloway, and I have not often seen one like yours. Like mine, she repeated, like a face that has been struck and has decided not to fall. She looked at him. She did not know what to say to that. He had not said it as flattery. He had said it the way a man names a color or a weight. It was an observation. She had not known he had been looking at her face at all. You followed me, she said. Yes, why? He shifted the hat in his hand. His grey eyes did not leave hers. Because something in the way you walked out of that room, he said, made me unwilling to sit in it any longer. The wind moved between them. Her cloak stirred. The mended him brushed against her ankle. You do not know me, Your Grace. No, you do not owe me a walk in the cold. No, then go back. He did not move. She found, to her own surprise, that she was tired. Not the tired of one long evening. The tired of 5 years of small, narrow rooms and bargains and counting window panes. Her knees, suddenly, did not want to hold her. She put her other hand on the stone wall of the bridge and she leaned, just a little. He saw it. He stepped forward. He did not come close. He stopped 2 paces from her, near enough to catch her if she fell, far enough that he was not crowding her. "Sit," he said, "on the wall, just for a moment." She sat. The stone was very cold even through her dress. She drew her cloak tighter. The Duke did not sit. He stood, his hat still in his hand, looking out across the dark fields. "I am not going back tonight," she said, after a while. "I did not think you were. I do not know where I am going." "That is allowed." She almost smiled. She did not, quite, but the corner of her mouth moved. "Your Grace," she said, "you cannot stand on a bridge in the cold all night with a strange woman." "I am not standing all night with a strange woman," he said. "I am standing for as long as you sit. When you stand, I will walk where you walk. When you reach a place where you may rest safely, I will leave you there. And then, in the morning, I will write to your aunt to tell her where you are, so that she may not come looking." She turned her head to look at him properly. "That is," she began. She did not finish. She did not know how to finish. He was not offering her marriage. He was not offering her love. He was offering her a walk, and a letter, and a roof for the night. And the small, clean fact that he was not going to leave her alone on a bridge in the dark. He was offering, in plain words, the thing she had not known she most needed. He was, she realized, treating her exactly the way one human being should treat another. No more, no less. She had not been treated this way in a very long time. "Your Grace," she said. Her voice was suddenly thinner than she meant. Why, he was quiet. He looked at the dark fields. He spoke without looking at her. "My mother," he said, "wore a cloak with mends on it. I have not seen another one since." She did not speak. She could not. "Your stitches," he said, "are like hers." He turned his head. His grey eyes met hers across the cold air. "That is not why I followed you," he said, "but it is why I noticed you. And I have learned in some years now to trust the things I notice." She lowered her eyes. She placed her gloved hand on the worn wool of her cloak, on the largest mend across her shoulder, the one her mother had made the year of the cough, the year before the cough took her. "Stand up, Miss Holloway," the Duke said gently. "It is too cold to sit. There is a small inn 2 miles on. The keeper is an honest woman. I will take you there. I will pay for a room. You will lock the door from inside. In the morning we will see." She stood. They walked. They walked slowly, because her feet were numb and the road was rough. The Duke walked beside her, not behind, not in front. He did not speak. He did not ask her questions. When she stumbled once on a stone, his hand came up and steadied her at the elbow, and let go again at once, and he did not look at her face when he did it. The smell of the night was wet earth and crushed grass, and somewhere, very faint, the smoke of a far cottage fire. The inn, when it came into view, was small and low, with one yellow light burning in an upper window. The Duke knocked. The keeper, a stout woman in a brown wool shawl, opened the door with a candle in her hand and her grey hair in a long braid down her back. She stared at the Duke as if he were a ghost, and then she stared at Marin in her mended cloak, and her face did a small quick thing that was nearly a smile. "Your Grace," she said. "Mrs. Boone," he said. "A room. 2 suppers. A fire. At once, Your Grace." The woman did not ask questions. She took Marin by the arm with a hand that was warm and rough, and led her up a narrow stair to a small room with a sloping ceiling, and a bed with clean white sheets, and a small fire already laid in the grate, as if someone had known. The Duke did not come up. He stayed below. Marin ate the supper that was brought up. Bread, and cheese, and a hot broth that tasted of barley and something green. She drank water. She washed her face in a basin of warm water that Mrs. Boone poured for her. She took off her wet dancing shoes and set them by the fire. She kept her mother's cloak on, even in the small warm room, and she sat by the fire for a long time and did not cry. Below, in the public room of the inn, the Duke of Hartwell sat in a wooden chair by the fire with a cup of plain ale in his hand. He did not drink it. He sat for a long time. He stared at the flames. He was a man who solved problems. He had identified a problem. The problem was not, strictly speaking, Miss Holloway. Miss Holloway was not a problem. Miss Holloway was a young woman who had, by his judgment of the half hour he had spent in her company, more steadiness in her than any three of his cousins put together, and more honesty than any woman he had been introduced to in 5 seasons. Miss Holloway was, in fact, the opposite of a problem. The problem was the aunt. The problem was the corridor with the long mirror. The problem was that a young woman with stitches on her cloak that matched his mother's stitches had walked out into the cold to keep from crying in front of people who had taught her that crying would be used against her. The Duke of Hartwell drank none of his ale. He set the cup down on the wooden table. He took from his coat a small leather book and a pencil. He wrote 3 short letters in a neat, clear hand. One was to his steward. One was to the vicar of the next parish, a man he trusted. One was to a solicitor in London. He did not write to the aunt. He had not yet decided what to say to the aunt. He slept 4 hours in another small room down the corridor from Merrin's. He woke before dawn. He paid Mrs. Boone. He paid her again, when she protested, and he told her she would not see him here again for several days, but that the room with the sloping ceiling was to be kept ready, and a fire kept laid in it, and any letter that came in for Miss Holloway was to be set aside and given only to Miss Holloway herself. Mrs. Boone nodded as if she had been taking such instructions all her life. When Merrin came down, in her grey dress and her mother's mended cloak, with her hair pinned up again and her face washed and her eyes clear, the Duke was at the inn door, his hat in his hand. "Miss Holloway," he said, "I have sent for a small carriage. It is for you. The driver is a man I trust. He will take you wherever you tell him, and he will not speak of it after." She looked at him. "Where shall I tell him to go, Your Grace? Anywhere you wish. I have no money. The driver is paid for the week. The inn is paid for the week. The vicar at Eastleigh, who was a friend of my father, is expecting a young lady on a short visit. He has a sister, a kind woman, who will be glad of the company. They will not ask why you have come. They will not write to anyone you do not wish to be written to. If you would rather go elsewhere, you have only to say." She was quiet for a long time. The smell of bread came up from the kitchen behind them. Outside, the first grey light was beginning to lie on the lane. "Why?" she said. "Why would you do this for me?" The Duke set his hat on his head. "Because last night," he said, "you walked out of a room you should not have had to be in, and you did it with more dignity than I have seen in any drawing-room in London. And because I do not believe a person who can do that should have to crawl back into a bargain made by smaller people. That is all. I am not a romantic man, Miss Holloway. I do not write poems. I solve problems. This was a problem I could solve. So I have." He paused. "You owe me nothing," he said. "You will see me again, if you wish to. You will not, if you do not wish to. I have written to your aunt this morning. I have told her that you are safe, and that you are not coming back. I have not told her where you are. I will not." She looked at him for a long moment. The morning light fell on his face. He did not look hard now. He looked tired. "Your Grace," she said. "Yes, thank you." He inclined his head. He went out. The small carriage was waiting on the lane. He helped her up himself. With one steady hand, she arranged her mother's cloak around her on the seat. He closed the door. Through the small window, she said, "Will you write to me, Your Grace?" He considered. "If you write to me first," he said. "Yes." The carriage moved off. He stood in the lane and watched it until it was gone around the curve. Then he turned and walked the other way, back toward the great house and the broken carriage and the rest of his life, and as he walked, the sun came up over the hills, and the wet grass smelled like the start of something. The carriage carried Merrin 6 miles north, to the small village of Eastleigh. The vicar there was a thin, tall man with white hair and a slow, careful voice, and his sister was a round little woman with pink cheeks and a laugh that came easily. They asked no questions. They put her in a small, bright room, with a window over an apple orchard and a basin of clean water, and a brown wool dress that had been the sister's once, and would, with a small alteration, fit Maren perfectly. The sister, whose name was Mrs. Thorne, looked at the mended cloak with a long, thoughtful look and said only, "Your mother sewed beautifully," and Maren felt something in her chest unclench. She stayed at Eastleigh for 2 weeks. She slept. For the first 3 days she slept more hours than she sat up, and Mrs. Thorne brought her broth and bread, and did not scold her. On the 4th day she got up and walked in the orchard. On the 5th she helped Mrs. Thorne to bake. On the 6th she sat by the window and wrote, for the first time in her life, a letter to a duke. The letter was short. "Your Grace, I am at Eastleigh. The vicar and his sister are kind. I am eating. I have not cried. I do not know what comes next, but I am no longer cold. Thank you again. Maren Holloway." She gave the letter to the vicar, who gave it to a man who rode south with it that afternoon. 3 days later a reply came back. It was also short. "Miss Holloway, I am glad you are warm. What comes next is your decision. I will be at Hartwell House for the rest of the month. If you wish to write again, write again. If you do not, do not. Either is honourable. Hartwell." She read the letter twice. Then she folded it and put it inside the lining of her mother's cloak, where her mother had once kept a small dried sprig of lavender against the wool. She wrote again, 2 days later. He wrote again, 4 days after that. The letters were short. They did not speak of love. They did not speak of futures. They spoke of small things. He told her about a horse on his estate that had been sick and was now better. She told him about an apple Mrs. Thorne had given her that had been the best apple she had ever eaten. He told her that his housekeeper had baked a particular kind of seed cake that morning. She told him about the colour of the leaves outside her window. The letters were dry. They were also, in their small, careful way, the most honest thing either of them had written in years. At the end of the 2nd week, on a clear, cold afternoon, a carriage came up the lane to the vicarage at Eastleigh. It was not the Duke's carriage. It was her aunt's. Mrs. Thorne saw it first from the kitchen window. She came to where Maren was sitting in the parlour with a piece of mending in her lap, and she said, very calmly, "There is a lady at the gate. She is asking for you. You do not have to see her." Maren put down the mending. She stood up. She felt her hands begin to shake, and she pressed them together until they stopped. "I will see her," she said, "in the parlour. With you in the room." "Yes, Mrs." Thorne said. "Of course." The aunt came in. She was dressed for travel, in a stiff dark dress and a great feathered hat. Her face was red, not from cold this time, but from anger she had carried a long way. She stopped just inside the door of the small parlour, and she looked at Maren, and her mouth opened and shut once like a fish. "You will come home with me," she said. "No, aunt, you will. The Duke of Hartwell wrote me a letter that any decent man would be ashamed to write. He has interfered in family matters. He has made a fool of me in front of half the county. You will come home, and you will tell him you were confused, and that you regret the trouble, and that you require nothing further from him." Maren stood very still. "No, aunt," she said again. "I am not coming home. I am not confused. I do not regret it." Her aunt took 2 steps forward. The feathers in her hat trembled. Her voice, when it came, was low and tight. The way it had been in the corridor of the great house, the way it had been when she said the words about Maren's mother in the borrowed bed. "You ungrateful child," her aunt hissed. "After everything I have done for you, you have done very little for me, aunt." Maren's voice was quiet, but it did not shake now. "You have given me a bed. I am grateful for the bed. I have paid for it with 5 years of silence. The account is settled." "How dare you, aunt?" Maren's eyes did not move from her aunt's. "Last month you told me my mother died in a borrowed bed wearing a mended cloak, and that I would die the same way. You told me that the Duke of Hartwell was laughing at me, and that I was too stupid to know it. Her aunt's face changed colour. Mrs. Thorne, by the window, did not move, but something in her shoulders went very still. I have thought, Maren went on, for 2 weeks about those words. I have decided that you were wrong about the Duke. I have decided that I do not know how I will die, and neither do you. And I have decided that my mother's mended cloak is the finest thing in any room I have ever stood in, because she sewed it with her own hands so that I would not be cold. That is what a mended cloak is. It is not a shame. It is a gift. And if you cannot see that, Aunt, then I am sorry for you, because it means no one ever loved you enough to mend anything for you in their lifetime. The room was quiet. Outside, a thrush sang once in the orchard and was quiet again. The fire in the parlour grate cracked softly. Mrs. Thorne, by the window, lifted one hand very slowly and placed it against her own mouth. Maren's aunt opened her mouth. She closed it. She opened it again. She did not find anything to say. She turned. She walked, in her stiff dark dress and her great feathered hat, out of the parlour and out of the vicarage, and down the path to the waiting carriage. She did not look back. The carriage rolled away down the lane and was gone. Maren sat down. Her knees, which had held her up through everything, gave way at last. She did not cry. She put her face in her hands for a long quiet moment, and she breathed. And Mrs. Thorne crossed the room and sat down beside her on the small sofa, and Mrs. Thorne put one warm hand on the back of Maren's neck. And that was all. That night, Maren wrote to the Duke. Your Grace, my aunt came today. She told me to come home. I told her no. She said many of the things I expected her to say, and I said what I needed to say in answer. She left. I do not think she will come again. I do not think she will write. I do not think I will ever see her again, and that is a thing I am still learning how to feel. I wanted you to know. Maren. His reply came 3 days later. It said only, I am proud of you. Hartwell, she kept that letter too in the lining of the cloak. Now, in this telling, time must move a little. Not much. 5 weeks. The autumn deepened. The apple orchard outside her window dropped its last red leaves. Mrs. Thorne taught Maren to make a particular kind of bread with caraway seeds that the vicar liked. The vicar taught Maren a little Latin, because he was a kind man with no one to teach, and she liked the shapes of the words. She walked every day 2 miles out and 2 miles back along the lanes. She wore her mother's cloak. She mended a tear in the elbow herself one evening by the parlour fire, and her stitches were like her mother's stitches, small and neat as ants in a line. The Duke wrote once a week. She wrote once a week. The letters grew, slowly, a little longer. In the middle of that 5th week, on a Thursday, a letter came that was different. Miss Holloway, I am in the next county on business. I shall be at the inn at Crow's Cross, 4 miles from Eastleigh, on Sunday afternoon. The keeper there is a friend. If you wish to take tea in her parlour, I shall be there from 2 o'clock. If you do not wish to come, I shall understand, and I shall not write to suggest such a meeting again. Hartwell, she read it 3 times. She thought for a long time about the small narrow room at the top of her aunt's house. She thought about the corridor with the long mirror. She thought about a bridge in the dark and a man who had walked across a field for her and asked nothing. She put on her mother's cloak. She walked. The inn at Crow's Cross sat at a meeting of 2 old roads, low and white, with a sign hanging from a hook that creaked in the wind. The smell when she stepped inside was bread and apples and a fire of seasoned oak. A small woman with kind brown eyes met her at the door, looked at her cloak with a long thoughtful look not unlike Mrs. Thorne's, and led her without a word into a small parlour at the back. The Duke stood up from a chair by the fire when she came in. He was dressed plainly. His hair had been brushed. His face was the same face she remembered, the face of a man who could not be moved by wind. But something in it was different this afternoon, in this small parlour with the smell of apples in the air. The hardness was set aside, like a coat hung on a hook. Miss Holloway, he said, Your Grace. Please sit. She sat. The keeper brought tea, and a plate of bread and butter, and a small dish of apple slices, and went out and closed the door. For a moment neither of them spoke. The fire snapped. Somewhere in the inn a clock ticked. Outside, very faintly, a horse stamped in a yard. "I did not know if you would come," he said. "I did not know either," she said. He nodded, as if that was the right answer. She poured the tea. Her hand was steady. She passed him his cup. He took it. The cup was small and white. His hands, she noticed for the first time, were not the hands she had expected from a duke. They were broad, with one old scar across the back of the right one, the kind of scar a boy gets and a man keeps. "I have been thinking," he said. "Yes, about what I noticed. That night. About why I noticed it." She did not speak. She held her own cup with both hands. The warmth went into her fingers. "I told you, on the bridge," he said, "that my mother wore a mended cloak. You did. That is true. But it is not all of it." He set his cup down. He did not look at her at first. He looked at the fire. "My mother died when I was 12, he said. She had been ill for a long time. The last winter she was alive, she sat by a fire much like this one, and she sewed. She had a basket of mending. She mended my shirts. She mended a cloak of her own that she did not need, because there were 3 good cloaks in the house already and only one of her. I did not understand why she sewed that cloak. I asked her. She said that mending was the work that kept her hands warm and her mind quiet, and that as long as she had a needle she would not be afraid. And then she said one other thing, which I have not told to anyone in 20 years, and which I shall tell to you now if you do not mind." "I do not mind," Maren said. Her voice was very small. She said, he went on, his eyes still on the fire, that a mended thing was better than a new thing, because a mended thing had been chosen twice. Maren set down her cup. Her hand did not shake. But she put it carefully back into her lap, and she folded her other hand over it, and she did not trust herself to speak. The Duke looked at her then. "When I saw your cloak," he said, "I saw my mother's stitches. When I saw your face, I saw a person who had been chosen twice, once by the woman who made that cloak, and once by herself. When she chose to keep wearing it in a room full of people who would have given her a new one for the price of her silence. That is what I noticed, Miss Holloway. That is why I crossed the room. And that is why I walked after you down the lane." He paused. "I am not asking you," he said. "I am only telling you. I have been a man for some years now who solves problems and does not look back. I have not had much use for choosing. I would like, if you would allow it, to choose. Slowly, without hurry. Without your having to perform anything in any room. If at any point you decide that the answer is no, the answer will be no, and you will keep this house at Eastleigh as your own for as long as you live, because I have already arranged it. And there is nothing for you to be afraid of in saying no. Do you understand me?" She did understand him. She sat very still. The fire snapped. The smell of the apples filled the small parlour. The cloak was warm around her shoulders. Inside the lining, the small dried sprig of lavender her mother had placed there long ago, pressed faintly against her ribs. And inside the lining too, folded small, were the letters he had sent her. The slow moment came. It was the moment she had not known she had been walking toward. All those steps along the cold lane, all those nights in the small narrow room, all those hours by the orchard window in Eastleigh. It was the moment between his asking and her answering. It was very long. It was, in fact, perhaps only a few seconds. But inside it Maren saw the corridor with the long mirror, and the bridge in the dark, and her mother's hands on a thin needle by candlelight, and Mrs. Thorne's warm hand on the back of her neck, and an aunt with a feathered hat walking down a path and never looking back. She saw all of these things, and she let herself feel each one, and then she let each one settle. The way coins settle in a clay jar. She lifted her eyes to his. "Your Grace," she said. "Yes, you walked after me in the dark. I did. You wrote me a letter every week. I did. You did not tell my aunt where I was. No, and you arranged a house for me even though you did not know what my answer would be. Yes," she drew a long, slow breath. "The smell of apples. The smell of the wool of her cloak, which still, after all these years, faintly smelled of lavender. "Then I do not need to think," she said. "I have been thinking for 5 weeks. I have been thinking in some ways for 5 years. My answer is yes. Slowly, without hurry, without my performing anything in any room. But yes." He did not move at once. When he did move, it was only to set his cup down on the small table very carefully, as if it might break if he set it down too quickly. Then he held out his hand across the table, palm up, the broad hand with the old white scar across the back. She put her hand in his. He closed his fingers gently around hers. He did not kiss her hand. He did not lift it to his face. He only held it. His thumb moved once, very lightly, across the worn place on her glove, where she had mended it herself 2 evenings before. "Miss Holloway," he said. "Yes, thank you." That was all that was said. The keeper came in some time later with fresh tea. She did not seem surprised to find the Duke of Hartwell and the young lady in the mended cloak sitting on opposite sides of a small table, holding hands across it like children. She poured the tea. She went out. She closed the door. Maren went back to Eastleigh that evening in a small carriage the Duke had hired. She did not stay long at the vicarage after that, but she did not go quickly either. There were letters to write, and a small bag to pack, and a great many words to say to Mrs. Thorne and to the vicar, who had given her 2 months of quiet that had saved her life, and asked nothing for it. The Duke did not come to Eastleigh. He waited. He waited at Hartwell House. She came to him on a still bright day, in the very last of the autumn. She came in a hired carriage, with one small trunk, and her mother's mended cloak around her shoulders. The great house, when she saw it, was larger than any house she had stood in before. The smell of the gravel in the wide drive was clean and dry. The servants on the steps did not smile, because servants in such a house did not smile. But their eyes were not cold. One older man, the housekeeper's husband perhaps, took her trunk with hands as careful as if it had been made of glass. The Duke met her in the front hall. He did not embrace her. He held out his hand again, palm up, and she put hers in it. "You are here," he said. "I am here." He nodded. He showed her, that first day, only one room. He did not show her the ballroom or the great library, or the long gallery of portraits. He showed her a small room at the back of the house, with 2 chairs by a fire, and a window that looked out into a kitchen garden where late herbs still grew. He had laid the fire himself. There was a small basket on one of the chairs. In the basket were 3 pieces of mending, which the housekeeper had given him that morning to take out of her own basket. There was a needle. There was thread. "I thought," he said, "that you might wish to begin here." She looked at the basket. She looked at the chairs. She looked at him. She smiled. It was the first time he had seen her smile, properly. And he stood quite still for the seeing of it. "Yes," she said, "I think I might." That winter they were married. The wedding was small. They did not invite her aunt. They did not invite the host of the great ball. They invited Mrs. Thorne and the vicar from Eastleigh, and Mrs. Boone from the inn near the bridge, and the housekeeper and her husband, and 4 old tenants of the estate whose families had served Hartwell House for many years. Maren wore a new dress, which was the Duke's gift, and her mother's mended cloak over it, which was hers, because he had asked her, very gently, if she would, and she had said yes. In the church, when she walked down the aisle, the cloak moved softly around her. The candles burned. The smell of beeswax and old stone and damp wool filled the small space. The vicar spoke the words. The Duke spoke his words. Maren spoke hers. The room did not go silent in the way the ballroom had gone silent all those months before when he had crossed the floor to her. It went silent in a different way. It went silent the way a room goes silent when something true is being said. And everyone in the room knows it, and no one wishes to spoil it with the sound of their own breath. A year passed. The kitchen garden at the back of the great house grew its herbs, and lost them, and grew them again. The fire in the small room at the back was lit every evening. The basket of mending was always full, because the housekeeper had at last admitted, after much pressing, that there was an entire cupboard of small torn things that had been waiting for years for someone with the patience to take them up. On a winter evening, with a thin snow falling outside the window, the Duke of Hartwell came in from the cold and stamped his boots on the mat at the door of the small back room. His wife was in the chair by the fire. She had a piece of cloth in her lap, an old shirt of his, with a long tear at the sleeve. Her hand moved slowly. Her stitches were small and neat as ants in a line. He stood in the doorway for a moment without speaking. He smelled, as he always did when he came in from the yard, of wood smoke and cold air and horses. She looked up. "You are home," she said. "I am home." She set down the shirt. She rose. She crossed to him. She lifted, with one careful hand, a small loose thread on the collar of his coat, where the wool had begun to fray. "You will need to leave this with me tomorrow," she said. He looked down at her. "I will," he said. That was all that was said. Outside the window, the snow fell on a kitchen garden where late herbs were sleeping under it. And a great house stood warm against the dark, and inside the small back room a fire snapped, and a basket of mending sat between two chairs, and a cloak with small dark stitches along its hem hung on a peg by the door, where it had hung every evening for a year, and where it would hang for many years to come. She had worn her mother's mended cloak, and she had not known, that first night, that the Duke had noticed every stitch. She knew it now. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If this moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive.